7 o'clock. Glad you're here. Rather cool night. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 tonight. Chapter 3. We'll begin a word of prayer. Brandon, would you lead some prayer, please? Verse 1 through about verse 8, Solomon is beginning to describe the activities of life, things that take place in life. And he's reflecting on what he has learned. And as we look at what he has to say about it, we have learned it as well. This brings back to memory some of the things he speaks of here, I would think it would be. But he says, to everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. And as we know, God has given us life. He's allotted to us a certain amount of days that we're to live. And in this time frame He has given to us, we're to do the best we can to live for Him. That's what we are to do. But of course, we know that some folks, they don't have God in their life, and they're going to live according to their own purpose. And God will not be a part of that purpose. And they're not going to have the happiness that they would think they would have. They'll be happy at times, but not as a Christian would as we go through life with a purpose in life, what we know what's going on. So He's given us, of course, we got 24-hour periods, and that's pretty much how we live. We live from day to day, 24 hours. We plan a day ahead, and sometimes we'll plan a little further ahead, if possible. But He's given us a block of time in life that we're going to live. Now, we don't know how much time's in this block. For some, it's shorter. For some, it's longer. But we plan accordingly to how long we think we're going to live. How many believe or think they're going to live to be age 100? Probably not. Probably not any of us. Maybe some. But we have a time frame there that we generally look at. Well, I think I'm going to live to be this long. And sometimes we base that upon how long our parents have lived. Because we have the genes from both mom and dad, and pretty much how much they live is about how much we're going to live. Not always, but sometimes we can sort of gauge it by that, if that be the case, but not always. I know I've already lived longer than my father lived. So I'm older than him than when he died. And he may be older as well. But God has given us a block of time, and we need to make the most of that time as we go about living everyday life. Now, we're told that we're here for a purpose. Like in Psalms 139 verse 16. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. So that shows the days were fashioned for me. You know, in your book, they're all written. We're here for a reason. We're not an accident. God has put us here at this time in life for a reason. He has given us a block of time to use. How are we going to use it? In Acts 17:26, He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. So He's determined, put us here, how long it's going to be, how long we're going to live. But we don't know. But we need to make the most of it while we're here. Now we go back to Ecclesiastes 3, starting here in verse 2. During this time we're given, there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. We have no control over either one, the time we're born or the time we die. No control. We didn't have a say-so. I want to be born during this time, or I want to die during this time. Now, some people may think, well, a person could take their own life, and they could determine when they're going to die. Well, there's no guarantee of that. A lot of individuals have attempted but failed and taken another life, and sometimes it helps them to refocus life when they survive, and sometimes they've done more damage, so much damage that they can't really focus on life at all. But yet, there's a time for us to be born. There's a time to die that Solomon says here. So make the most of it while we're here. When it comes to a time to pluck, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted, there's a time within the growing season that we plant and a time that we harvest. We plant in the spring, we gather in the summer and in the fall. You don't mess with that. You don't go about and try to plant in the fall. It's not going to make it. So God has given a time when we produce that which we eat, a time frame in that. In verse 3, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. Most think here in verse 3 on the time to kill and the time to heal that Solomon's speaking about sickness. Some sicknesses will kill you. Some we get over. We've all been sick. Up to this point, we've gotten over it. But there's coming a time when we're not going to get over it. There's going to be something out there that's going to get us in our time frame that we have here to live. And we're going to do our best to fight it every step of the way. Do our best to overcome it. So here he's talking about a time of sickness, which we all understand. We've all been there, and we've been healed before. A time to break down and a time to build up. We build things. We build things all the time. But there's coming a time when things that we have built are going to break down. You build a house. We do the best we can to provide in that house things that will cause it to last. But we know the time's coming when it's going to break down. It's going to decay, and it's going back to the earth itself even. And we understand that. According to science, if man ceased to exist totally on the face of this earth, it wouldn't be many years till nature would take over. And everything would go just crumbling back down to the earth. No, it wouldn't take very long at all for that to happen. But all you got to do is drive down the road and you see somebody's house that once was livable, that once was kept up, but something happened and it's crumbling down and unlivable now, maybe on the ground even. You don't have to drive very far down the road. You see structures like that. And we think, well, not my place, not my house, because I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to do what I can to make sure it survives and such. But what about the time when you're not around? When you passed on? What about your children? What are they going to do with it? Are they going to rent it out? Well, you know what? You know how renters can destroy something. And anytime a renter says, I'm going to take care of it just like it's my own, boy, look out, that's a red flag. And they may very well do it. and it'll be destroyed in a couple of years. Or maybe you sell it, or your children sell it, and the next owners don't keep it up, and down it comes. And you certainly know what happens when a house is not occupied over a period of time. It just sits there, it's going to fall apart. Well, in our bracket of life here, there's a time to build, and there's a time, it's going to be destroyed. It's going to go down. We know that. So we build in this window of time that we have been given. In verse 4 there, he says, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Well, during this block of time that we've been given, I hope that we have more days of laughter and more days of dancing than we do days of weeping and mourning. I hope we do. And generally we do. It's not that every day is just a fun-filled day every year, but if you were to go about trying to count last year, how many days of last year was a day of laughter, a day of dancing, versus a day of weeping and a days of mourning? Well, we probably had some of those days of hardship in there, but hopefully the good outnumbers the bad. And that's what Solomon is telling us here. I don't know what the ratio is, but there's certainly a ratio there, good to bad. But hopefully in our life we have more good than we do bad. Hopefully that we do that. And Solomon's bringing that out there in these verses. In verse 5, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. If you're going to build something, you've got to get rid of the stones. And it may be that in order to protect it, you've got to gather stones and put a fence around it, something like that. But there's a time for that, a time to grow things, time to build things, get rid of the stones that are there, the roots, all those things that would hinder you, like a garden. You've got to get rid of those things if you're going to have a garden. A time to embrace. There's a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to show your appreciation. Time to show your affection to somebody. You appreciate it. And it may be a hug or it may be a handshake. But enough's enough, It's a time to, okay, I appreciate this. You got to do something else now. You just can't sit there and hug and hug and hug and hug or handshake and never let go. Again, there's a time to show your appreciation. Then there's a time to move on and start doing what you need to do during this block of time that's been given. Verse 6, a time to gain, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away. Again, during this, hopefully this bracket of time, we're going to gain more than we lose. We know we're going to lose at times, but hopefully not every day. Hopefully we gain more during this time frame that we have here. And during this time, we can't keep everything that we accumulate. We've got to throw some of it away. If you don't throw it away, you wind up on TV with hoarders. They will come in your house and start filming, and everything's piled in there, and rats and everything else that goes with it. Sometimes you got to throw things away. But there's a time for that. A time to gain, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away. Verse 7, a time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silent and a time to speak. This one here, verse 7, a time to tear, is referencing to the Jewish custom of grief. When they would get terrible news, they would tear the clothing. If that happens, you find that in the New Testament especially. They would tear their clothing at bad news. But also, there's a time to grieve, and when that grief is over, you sew it back up. They just didn't walk around with those clothes torn all the time. They would sew them back up. So you're going to have a time in your life when there's a time to have grief. But you got to get over it. Everybody's different. You don't live your whole life in this state of grief. You got to move on. Life moves on. Some individuals like to live in the past. They like to keep things fresh, stirred up when it comes to these things. But there's a time to tear. There's a time to grieve. Have that time of grieving. But also there's a time to sow and put it back together and get your life going back the way the Lord wants you to be. Do that. A time to keep silent, of course, we know that. And a time to speak. We've all known individuals that needed to keep silent when they were speaking. They don't know when to hush. They like to hear themselves talk. Proverbs 17:28 tells us about a fool. He says, a fool is counted wise even when he keeps his mouth shut. Again, sometimes when they keep their mouth shut. You remember Job's friends, they came and they should have been quiet. They should have just come and been there with him and encouraged him and helped him. And they did so, I think, for a week, how long it was they were there with him. They didn't say a word. But then they made the mistake of opening their mouth and speaking things they shouldn't have been speaking. So there's time to talk, and there's time to keep silent. It's best if we know when. When do one and then do the other. Verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. There are things in this life that we are to love and things in this life that we are to hate. And don't get the two confused. Don't hate the things that we are to love and don't love the things we are to hate. The world gets that confused a lot of times, and they're loving things that they shouldn't be loving, and they're hating things that they shouldn't be hating, and we can't fall into that trap. Don't get that reversed. He talks about war, a time of war. I know sometimes you're going to have war. Evil has to be overcome. Evil has to be fought against. You need to preserve our freedom. There's a time for that. But even in times of war, you need to try to be seeking peace. All wars eventually end. They all end eventually. Seek peace, maybe in the beginning, before it happens. During the war itself, and especially in the end. We want to have peace. That's a good thing. That should be our goal, to have peace in life. So you're going to have times of war. You're going to have times of peace. But hopefully, we have more times of peace than we do war. You think about in our time bracket that we're living, how many wars have been fought during this time? Again, there's a few in my bracket. I can remember there's the Vietnam War, and then there's all the Gulf Wars that happened, that took place, that our nation was involved in. And there's been other skirmishes, and we might include the war in the Ukraine. I don't know, include that or not, but certainly in our time frame of life, we have wars that we can relate to that come about. And our kids will be the same thing. There will continue to be wars even in their lifetime. And in verse 9, it says, what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? So what have we accomplished in our time of life, this bracket of life that we're living? What have we accomplished? You would think that Solomon would say, look at everything I've accomplished. And he did accomplish a lot. But he looked at that and thought, it's all for nothing. I mean, if Solomon can look at everything he accomplished and say it's for nothing, how can we look at our little accomplishments and think, well, look how great we are, what we have done? We can't do that. If Solomon couldn't do it, then why do we think that we can? Because, again, our labors, what have we been laboring for? What's it about? In our labors, in our work, how many have been brought to the Lord? How many have we tried to do this, to bring them. How many? And that's what he's talking about here. It's not about me, what I've accomplished. But what am I doing to help fill heaven? What am I doing there? What am I doing to accomplish work there? I held a funeral once of a faithful Christian man, and the person was there that was responsible for him for being a Christian. And at the beginning or somewhere in that funeral, I said to him, if you had not made the effort and gone to his house, this would be a whole different situation. It'd be a much sadder situation than what it is. And again, he didn't really think about that. But that's how true it was. He made an effort, and the effort paid off. Solomon says, what profit do we have from all our labors if we're not doing something from the standpoint of helping God, for God, and showing others what God's about? What are we doing? So that's sort of verse 1 through 9. He talks about this block of time that we are being given. How are we using it? What are we doing? Verse 10. I have seen the God-given task with which sons of men are to be occupied. He's now bringing God into the picture a little bit. I'm understanding this now, he says, a little better. It's not just about me, but it's doing what I want, but am I doing what God wants me to do? He's beginning to see his God-given task, what God has given him to do. So God put man on this earth to work. We were to be busy, no doubt about it. Adam worked even before the sin. He was in the garden working. Well, there's also a spiritual work that we are to do, our God-given task to carry out. And Solomon's beginning to see that a little bit as he goes through his life. Verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to end. So hopefully when we stop and look at life, hopefully we look at life and say, boy, it's a good life. I've had a good life. I've had a beautiful life. Hopefully we can say that, but not focus on the negative. Again, some folks, they're just negative. It's their nature. And they can't look at all the good about their life. But Solomon here is saying, life is good. Life is a blessing. And sometimes, people will say that, God is good. Then they'll say that God is good all the time. People will say that. Let me check on Lynn. Let's see what's going on. Oh, he's all right. And we see life, and sometimes it has its moments, but sort of like that cocoon, got the butterfly in there, and over a period of time, the butterfly comes out, and we see how beautiful it is, how the process of life, it can be very beautiful if we look at it that way. So, God has put eternity in our hearts. And that means that we have the ability to look forward to a better day. We have the ability to know that hopefully tomorrow's going to be better. And that's just a part of life. We get sick and we think, well, I hope tomorrow's better. I feel better tomorrow. Looking forward to a better tomorrow. And with the eternity that He's put in our hearts, we look at a better place that's going to be. That's where we're really focusing at. And the older we get, the more beautiful that place of heaven looks. And the more we're looking forward to that place of heaven. That's where the eternity in our heart, that's where it begins. That's what it's about. And how sad it is for individuals, for whatever reason, they have taken that hope that God has put in them and they have pushed it to the side. They don't believe in eternity. They don't believe in a God or anything like that. Oh, it's in them. They just push it to the side and let something else come in and cloud it for them. And that's sad that it's that way. And they see everything about life is what we have right now and nothing beyond this life. But God has put eternity in our hearts. He did to Solomon. And Solomon here is looking, he said, this is a good life, beautiful life. And so there's a little bit of God that's coming out. Remember what Solomon does. He's a little bipolar. One minute he's very worldly, and the next minute he's very godly. Well, right here, he's very godly right here. You know, how he's looking at life. And he's saying it's not so bad. Not so bad at all. 12 and 13. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. So God wants us to enjoy life. He certainly does. Look at it as a blessing, and we certainly all have blessings every day, and give God the credit for what He's done for us. Know that life is good, and certainly thank Him for it, for the good life that we have. In 14 and 15, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it that man should fear before Him. That which has already been and that which to be has already been, and God requires an account of what is past. Yeah. We're not going to change God's plan. We're not going to change what He's got laid out for mankind. I mean, God had a plan from the very beginning, before anything was created. Here's what He's going to do, and here's how it's going to end. And we're not going to change that. God's plan is going to be carried out. We're not going to add to it. We're not going to take away from it. We just need to get on board and go along with it and not fight against it. And how good it is to be a part of that plan. How His plan was to save mankind. How that plan today is to be done with the gospel. And how we need to carry out that plan. And if we don't, well, somebody else will. You know, it's in Luke 19:40 where Christ says if we don't do it, the stones will cry out. The stones will do our job if we don't do it. So God has a plan out here. And He wants us to be a part of it. And then verse 15, what we think is new has already happened. And what we think is going to happen has already happened. There's nothing new under the sun. Solomon uses that phrase quite a bit. So as life goes on, if God's plan is being worked, as God's plan is being carried out, there's really nothing new. It's just new to us. And need to make the most of it. And one day, as he says here, and God requires an account of what is past. One day we certainly will stand before God. Those are the past, and those are the present, and those are the future will as well. All right, 7:30, we're going to end here, verse 16, take up next week. Verse 16 and the rest of the chapter is really, really good, especially toward the end, when Solomon compares his life to an animal. And a lot of folks will look at those verses and think that animals have souls. Animals can be saved. And they'll use that, and we'll talk about that some more in depth when we get there, about animal life. how important they are to us. All right. 7:30, about time for the bell, and we'll end here.